Hello! Before we get down to cinema, I would like to draw your attention to our Patreon. Regular listeners will know that these podcasts are supported by Quad, our home cinema in Derby, UK. But as Quad is a charity, we want to make Cinelit as self-sustainable as possible. So, to that end, we have set up a two-tier way in which you can support Cinelit. For our 35mm Cine fans, you'll get a bonus additional episode each month where we will be deep diving into an area of cinema that will be exclusive to Patreon subscribers for at least 6 months before it arrives like a late dinner guest on the regular feed. Plus, you get the episodes a week in advance of the main feed release. But if you want to support us and don't feel that pressing need to have the additional podcast each month, but still want that warm, satisfying feeling of being part of the Cinelit success story, then you can become an 8mm Cine fan, where you can donate and get our heartfelt thanks. Head over to the Patreon page and subscribe if you can. However, we know that times are hard at the moment, so please do not feel you need to subscribe if you are not able. We'll still be putting out new, free-to-listen to episodes on a regular basis throughout the year. Now let's get back to your regular scheduled broadcast. Welcome to Cinelit. Today we are heading back to the 1950s to take a look at a brace of films that established a director on the path to glory. We are, of course, talking about Stanley Kubrick, who left behind some of the most revered films in cinema history. But those films are a topic for another day. Today we are looking at two films at the start of his career, Killer's Kiss, 1955, and The Killing, 1956. Two films that convinced Hollywood that this Kubrick guy was worth investing in. My name is Adam Marsh and I am joined by Cinelit's resident expert Daryl Buxton. How are you, Daryl?
I'm fine, thanks, Adam. Looking forward to this.
Cool. And joining us today to discuss these works is the host of Quad's Midweek Treat, film lecturer David Lester. How are you, David?
Hi, Adam. Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Cool, so this is right on my street, guys. You know, 1950s crime films. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes, sign me up, no problem. I'm less of a Kubrick acolyte, but I appreciate his quality, and I'm fascinated by these two movies. More so than maybe some of his other movies, but... yeah, so what should we just start in order? Killer's Kiss, 1955. A nice and pacey 1 hour and 7 minutes, 67 minutes. So, you know, a vast change from the latter days of Kubrick's career when his films were regularly over 2 hours. Here he's doing one in just over an hour and telling a story.
Yeah, I don't know if he did in later life review his films and reveal how he reacted to them then. I think he would have been a bit embarrassed by Killer's Kiss, for instance. I think there are some conventions there that he certainly would have jettisoned. The initial voiceover, the internal monologue from the central character, is something I don't think he would have done. I mean, we have the commentary in Barry Lyndon, for instance, the voiceover, this disembodied commentator. But the content of what he's saying is interesting. In Killer's Kiss, it's just a kind of setting. Yeah.
So I mean, we probably should tell the story of Killer's Kiss. It's about an aging out boxer, probably on the downturn of his career, who starts a relationship with his neighbour. And gets involved in a violent threesome, I guess, between him, his neighbour, and her boyfriend, employer, heavy, mob boss type character. So it's relatively by the numbers crime film of 1955 in many ways.
Yeah, I agree. But there are still already, I think, certain signals that he's not doing things in the expected way. The way in which we discover the woman, just a blur in the background in an established shot where the boxer is in his own apartment, I wonder whether Louis Malle, who did Atlantic City, had ideas from that film when he was making that Atlantic City. I do think there are certain similarities.
Well, the French anyway were very influenced by these kind of crime movies, weren't they? They saw them as having a purity that conventional Hollywood films at the time didn't have. You know, things that they couldn't control slipped through the net and showed bared cinema more truthfully, I guess.
Yeah. The shot you've mentioned there, David, seems to be, or could be argued to be, a riff on Hitchcock's Rear Window from the previous year.
Right.
And the film sort of looks as though it's going to develop in that direction for a while, but then doesn't, and goes off somewhere else. I think also audiences of that time would have, going in and realising that, it's a boxing flick, it's a boxing movie, would have then thought back to recent films like Body and Soul or The Setup, and the standard with boxing films of the late 40s was that they were often, like those two classic films I've just mentioned, were often about throwing the fight and gangsters being involved in manipulating the results of fights. And again, you may well have expected that from this movie. So you've got those two, that sort of twin prong there of, it's going to be about a boxer who's asked to throw the fight by gangsters, and it's going to be like that Alfred Hitchcock film we saw 6 months ago. And then it doesn't go in either of those.
It's intriguing to speculate as to whether Kubrick intended that, to wrong foot the audience and say you're going to get a boxing movie with the usual themes.
Yes, we know that he was into boxing.
Yes.
Because he made Day of the Fight in 1953.
And he was obviously interested in that
documentary
culture.
films.
And I think his interests are reflected in this film as well.
Yeah, well, we need to talk about his background in photography, I think, really, before we go into these two films, because we know Kubrick as a filmmaker, but you were suggesting earlier on when we were speaking that there might have been a point in his life when film didn't really matter all that much to him.
I'm not aware that he mentions being intrigued in any way or involved in any way in film culture when he was young.
I mean, he was fairly. I mean, he was 23 when he made Killer's Kiss, so he's fairly young.
Yeah.
You know, particularly young for Hollywood standards. You didn't get many 23, 24-year-olds.
I mean, obviously, it became his ambition. We know that his background was in photography. And I think he was about 16 or something when he was employed as a photographer. And he was earning more than his parents at that young age. And clearly, I mean, when you look at the photographs as well, you can see how increasingly they get composed. And also the subject matters within those. And it's leading into his filmmaking.
Yeah,
because
that's the question we need to consider, having started on photography at such an early age and become so successful at it. Was there always the ambition to get into filmmaking, or would he have been content to become the world's greatest street photographer? His photos, if you look at a lot of his sort of early photographic work, it's very much in that sort of noir type sort of element that he brings to these early films.
Yeah.
Well, there's a grittiness to it as well. Like you say, he's a street photographer. He was definitely a street element to his early work, particularly, and then that transfers, and that's kind of the time as well. I mean, you think like in these are both crime films, the two films we're talking about today, and there was a big boom in publishing in the 40s, particularly, and by the time the 50s rolled around, the sort of like the crime publishing boom, which is going in the 40s, had kind of worked itself to a point where they were getting more and more outrageous, more and more violent, more and more lurid and sexy, and to the point where you get to these characters in this film. I can't imagine a lot of these characters being in a film noir of 1948. They're grittier, they're harder, they're more real.
They're very influenced by that sort of pulp novel.
Absolutely. And I think he was taking from that.
Yeah, and of course Kubrick, I'm sure, would have been going to see films like Body and Soul and like all the classic noir from an early age, because I know we're going to talk about The Killing later on. I know that Kubrick cast The Killing largely simply by picking actors that he'd liked in other film noir, which is why you get Mary Windsor and Elisha Cook Jr. and people like that.
Yes, indeed,
we'll come on to that later, but I mention it now because that suggests that he was actually, while he was out on the streets taking his photographs, when he'd got a spare couple of hours or a spare afternoon, he was probably going to the cinema to see a film noir double bill.
Yeah.
So I mean, there was clearly, I would guess that there was an interest in cinema as a viewer rather than a participant from an early age.
I get the feeling with Killer's Kiss that it's a film that discovers itself increasingly. We mentioned the fact that it sets itself up as a boxing movie and goes somewhere else. But clearly, he just loved filming on the streets.
Oh, yeah.
And you're thinking of things like Jacques Tourneur's Naked City.
Yeah.
Again, a film that stood out largely because it was filming on the streets rather than creating sets.
And again, how much of this came out of the fact that filmmakers might have been looking overseas and looking at things like Italian neo-realism, and the fact that people suddenly, you didn't need to film in a studio, you didn't necessarily even need Hollywood connections, you could make a film, and for New York filmmakers, for someone based on the other side of America like Kubrick was, here was the opportunity to go out and make a film without the usual constraints.
But it really works well. I mean, I think that final sequence, the chase sequence through the city, is extraordinarily adventurous. I mean, you're getting overhead shots, you're getting tracking shots, you're getting distant shots, but the editing works very well. It maintains that kind of edginess. And the tension.
Even early in the film, there's we do. While the film is still a boxing film and set within that sort of milieu, we get to see a fight scene, and it's shot rather differently to the fight scenes that we'd probably seen from Hollywood movies at that time. It's not quite Raging Bull, but it's sort of a step in that direction, and it's Kubrick creating and inventing a new way of filming that type of conflict.
Well, I was going to say that he's using the camera really as a witness, I feel, in those fight sequences. It's not being edited in order to create an artificial energy.
No. Well, as we say, he'd already made a documentary on boxing the day of the fight, and this is almost. It's stylized. It's not documentary like this. It's very fictional movie, but it's got a ringside quality to it. The camera is very, very close. We can see the ropes as we do in Raging Bull, very, very close up and prominent in the frame, and then suddenly we're in the ring as well. We're sort of being punched, or we're giving punches. I think he's bringing a new language to the sports movie there.
I mean, the documentary style does feed into that. Obviously, it feeds in a lot more in The Killing. I think The Killing is much more, has its roots in that in his experiences in documentary. But it's in this as well. Even the voiceover, I think the voiceover is a hangover from the documentary bit.
And he then carries that over into The Killing as well. There's still voiceover in The Killing. So your suggestion earlier that it might be something that he might look back on and have dismissed. I'm not so sure, because I think if he was going to dismiss that type of thinking, he'd have done so by the time he was working on The Killing. I think he'd have seen The Killing as a more serious film than the two that he'd done up to that point, Killer's Kiss and Fear and Desire. And the fact that he's kept voiceover in there, and the fact that he's still in the world of noir, and the fact that we're pairing these two films today, suggests to me that the use of voiceover was intentional. It was a choice. It wasn't something that was sort of foisted on him. And I'm not so sure that he would have necessarily, given the chance, gone back and re-edited these films, or gone back and dismissed them or disowned them.
I still feel that the voiceover in Killer's Kiss is more a convention, whereas in The Killing, it becomes a presence. It's saying stuff. Also, because they had Jim Thompson writing the dialogue, and it's a real step up.
In that sense, do we see Killer's Kiss as being a sort of step on the ladder to The Killing? Would The Killing not have existed without Killer's Kiss as a sort of trial run?
Well, that's true, but I still think that. I think we'd probably all agree that The Killer's Kiss stands on its own as something which is worth attention.
I think also some of the things that I think Kubrick pulled from Killer's Kiss were not necessarily realised in The Killing, but were realised in later films. Particularly the sequence again towards the end with the mannequins. is like it's really stylized and and you think, and I'm sitting there thinking, there's Clockwork Orange in here. You can see the roots of a lot of his more The Shining and things like that. You can see some of those odd scenes.
Yeah, the combat itself. I mean, this is set in a modern warehouse in New York with mannequins, made out of plastic, the very symbol of modern America at that time, and so the characters have to fight using whatever is in the warehouse, whatever they can actually find, and they manage to find weapons that are of the time, they're of the period, and they're of the place, but they look like weapons that you might have seen in Spartacus a few years later, or a medieval setting. They are almost gladiatorial, or something that you might have seen on a battlefield with knights fighting each other. It's got that very sort of period quality to it. It's a classic conflict, and with this whole sort of weirdness of these sort of disembodied heads and hands hanging down and things. I suppose even an opportunity to get copious nudity on screen in 1953 in the shape of these plastic torsos.
I think it's the wrong kind of plastic, I think. That's it.
We're getting on to the graduate here.
You're absolutely right, though. What a scene, as a climax to this hour of entertainment.
I mean, there's no reason for the mannequins to be there,
No.
except that you can exploit it cinematically.
Yeah.
And he does it very effectively.
And I think also it's one of those things where there's no reason for Stanley Kubrick in his second features to have mannequins, but we wouldn't even be questioning it if it was Stanley Kubrick in '84 doing that scene. It'd be like, well, of course, it's a stylish finish.
You see mannequins used in A Clockwork Orange, and you think, what great set design, what imaginative set design, and this is where that stems from.
But I think he's already at that point in the film, he's earned his right to go to do this artificial thing. Of having these mannequins and having this fight.
Well, in his own mind, I think he comes into this film, maybe not so much in Fear and Desire, his previous film, which he did disown, but I think he comes into Killer's Kiss. In his own mind, he thinks all the years that I've been on the streets taking wonderful photographs, I've paid my dues. I've earned this. I've earned the right to be a little bit artistic and flamboyant. And he goes for it.
When we talk about Kubrick as the man who liked to subvert genres, we think about like The Shining and things like that, and 2001: Space Odyssey. You get the subversion of genre. Is he doing it here? Is this the kind of thing where right at the very start he's saying, well, most crime films would be fairly straightforward, particularly ones that are 67 minutes and meant as B features. They wouldn't have these weird imagery in a crime movie, so I'm adding that to the mix to separate myself from the genre.
I think there's one scene in the film that answers that question, Adam. The scene where the female lead is telling a story about the suicide of her sister, who's a ballerina, and we don't see her telling the story. We don't see a depiction of the events. We don't see a flashback. We see a ballerina on stage dancing for 5 minutes. Now that's clearly an artistic choice and a vision, and it's something that you wouldn't have seen in The Maltese Falcon.
The ballerina being Kubrick's wife as well.
Yes,
at the time as well. Not saying he did that just to get her in the movie for 5 minutes, but I
think that sense of artifice and that sense of being able to play with what cinema is. And that's something you couldn't have done, crucially, in a photograph either, because if you did that as a photograph, people would look at that photo and they would say, it's a photo of a ballerina on stage. And in this film, you're looking at a ballerina on stage, but you're seeing something and experiencing something very different.
I think I would argue, one way in which this stands out against other film noirs is that from the beginning, you don't have characters with power. You don't have the arch enemy that you're fighting. You don't have the gang boss. We have a villain who emerges, but he's a bit low key, isn't he? He's a bit low status.
In some ways, it's like it is like a prototype Jim Thompson. Then Jim Thompson has that sort of like the flaw. The big villain is the flaws inside his own characters. And I think that's a similar vibe here going.
But you can more easily engage with someone who's not so far above you and out of reach. Because he's a very sensitive actor, He's playing this role in a very sensitive way. He's not the bullish figure that we would expect a boxer to be. We recognise as the film goes on that he's on the slide, that his career as a boxer is virtually over, and he's just collecting the money and getting the punches.
Yeah,
but he's a likeable character.
Yeah, and he's clearly an intelligent guy as well. He's not just a big lunk, a big sort of palooka, who's taken too many punches.
Yeah.
He's a guy who, he may be coming to the end of his boxing career, but he's clearly got one eye on, well, what's my future? What next? Rather than a character who just sort of descends into a depression and dwells in this world where my life's over.
You recognise as well, it's established that there are family ties and family affection. There is the uncle that obviously he's very fond of. He's getting phone calls. It's not a burden to have to talk to a member of his family.
There have been one or two reviews of the film. I don't think it got too many reviews when it came out, so a lot of the coverage of it has been later on. And some reviews have sort of said they find the film a little bit too arty and a little bit too sort of mannered at times. I disagree, because I think it's so short that Kubrick can get away with little motifs and little concerns like that. I love, for instance, and this may be a little nod to his own photographic background. We see the shot of the boxer's mirror, and it's got you don't get a glimpse. You only get a briefest blurry glimpse of them, but you see there are photographs all around the edge of the mirror. And then Kubrick does this great montage where he shows you each photograph in close-up, one after the other, but not long enough for you to sort of register what's in the photos and make anything of it. I'm sure if you watch the film on Blu-ray or whatever these days, and stop and freeze frame it, you can probably tell a whole story out of that. There's then that great, very sort of mannered shot of the close-up in the goldfish bowl, which again comes very, very early on, but seems to be a sort of statement of intent, almost as he's seen the neighbour by this point. He's seen the girl across the way, the sort of rear window shot, and so we've got his face grotesquely distorted in the curve of the goldfish bowl, and two goldfish swimming around in the foreground. Again, I guess representative of him and her. I don't know if you want to take that from it.
I get a sense that it was saying that we have a sensitive person here. You wouldn't expect a boxer to be keeping goldfish. And also, when he leaves the apartment, he leaves the instruction, please feed the goldfish. So he doesn't forget about them.
So as well as potentially being symbolic, it's there for character reasons as well. It's there as a natural sort of thing. It's there as a realistic thing.
Well, he's brought into the plot though to look after to his neighbour. He's like, should I get involved? There's like a moment where should I get involved? And I think the goldfisher there was like, well, of course I've got my own goldfish. Of course I'm going to get involved and help people here.
I mean, I had the feeling at the beginning,
sort of catalyst as well.
That the set was a bit overpopulated. But as Darren said, he actually uses those items. We explore those pictures. We do see we are not standing outside the apartment. We do get inside it. I think it's worth mentioning as well the female character, because she's not just there in order to advance the plot of the boxer. She's there in her own right, and I think it's an interesting choice that Kubrick has made here of setting. In many ways, she doesn't have a future in this setting as much as the boxer no longer has a future. The boxer has had some kind of status, some kind of success. She's there as, well, in some ways, as a kind of mannequin in this kind of strange culture where men pay to have dances with attractive young women. And, of course, there's the opportunity there that it might develop into something else. But I think that is nicely shot, the way in which we are in the dance hall itself. And we're seeing these couples, and in many ways they do still feel quite disembodied as a kind of portent of what we're going to see with the mannequins. In many ways, she has as much status as a mannequin. I don't think Kubrick necessarily thought as deliberately as that. I hope not, because it's a bit pretentious, to be honest. But I find that very effective. And he's invested in that as much as he is invested in the story of the boxer and the world in which he lives.
I think so, yeah. And,
I think the casting for her is great because in a lot of these crime film noir films around this period, you're getting people like Lana Turner or Barbara Stanwyck in these movies. And they are completely unbelievable as real characters. Yeah. They are visions on screen, sort of thing. And Irene Kane is not that. She's a very beautiful woman, but she's not that unattainable, unrealistic.
She's not glamorous. Yeah. There is something about the hair which is a little bit kind of dowdy. There's something about the makeup which is not quite secure there. I mean, makeup creates a face. And often it's an artificial one. Yeah. The heavy use of lipstick, for instance, often creates a being which has no personality. Yeah. She clearly has personality, but the personality is emerging from the bits of grit that are underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That extends to the casting of Mary Windsor in The Killing, I think, as well, who again isn't a sort of a conventional screen beauty and a conventional noir heroine. She'd been in film noir previously, but was not a glamour queen. She wasn't a Lana Turner. And at a point where you sense Kubrick and the studio may well have been able to afford somebody with a bit more prestige to play that part. I think, to come back to the dance hall, David, it's such a sad and lonely place and a shady place. Yeah. It's clearly like a lot of the settings of the killing of Killer's Kiss, rather. They're clearly all places that are run by gangsters or the mob or some kind of shady business. We never really get into that. That's always left lurking in the background. We're not seeing the sort of upper strata of all this. We're not seeing where the money's counted and where the decisions are made. We're seeing the very lowest tier, the very bottom rung. Right. And I think the dance hall is about as low as it gets. The big band music that plays as the dancers go on is again very, very reminiscent of what came later in the Overlook Hotel, in the ballroom scenes in The Shining. Yes. And specifically, I think with the sort of echoey quality of the music and the fact that you get that same sort of echo playing in an empty room or what we see as an empty room in the hotel in The Shining 25 years later. I think another echo of the future comes into play in the scene where the boxer's manager is beaten to a pulp in the alleyway. I don't think we ever find out his fate, do we?
No.
Whether he's just badly beaten or actually murdered. But isn't that scene set up and lit and the use of shadows and everything almost identical to the scene with the homeless guy under the subway in Clockwork Orange?
Right. Yeah.
You can see the sort of development of that famous iconic scene in the later film right here in Killer's Kiss. And again, I suppose the use of elongated shadow on walls and so on, you could argue that's a bit of a noir trope already by then. I think the setup had used very similar sort of scenes. It had a scene very, very much like that with the Robert Ryan being beaten up in a similar sort of location. In fact, with a cut away to the wall. Robert Wise actually focuses on a wall at one point as the key moment of violence is taking place, which is a shot that Tarantino then imitated for the famous ear scene in Reservoir Dogs. Yeah. But Kubrick in one sense there, he's sort of copying a standard idea from noir, that you film with elongated shadows and you film against stark brick walls and so on, and you film from overhead. But then 16 years later in A Clockwork Orange, he's still applying those tricks.
Yes, but he's inside the action more. Yeah. By the time we get to Clockwork Orange,
he is. Yeah. But then if you're talking about being inside the action, he's already shown in the boxing scene here that he can do that.
And the dance hall, I would say.
Yeah, indeed.
I think it's quite an interesting one to see how much he is forging anew and how much is he pulling from somewhere else. I mean, like you talk about Tarantino, people like Tarantino created this, or maybe the 80s prior to Tarantino as well, created this world of referencing other filmmakers. Whereas I don't think that necessarily was a thing in the 1950s. It was more like bringing your experiences from other art forms to film. It's like in Kubrick's case, photography. And also just him drawing from like what was popular at the time. He was trying to make a movie that would be sold and be in cinemas and make money, so he could move on in his career. And he picked film noir, argue one of the most popular genres, but also he picked a big publishing boom at the time was sleaze novels, where it was like stories of fallen women in brothels, women in dire financial needs, doing things that they wouldn't normally do or wouldn't have to do. And he's channeling some of that in some of those dancehall scenes, definitely, particularly The World. That's there as well, and that would have been a commercial, particularly in publishing at the time, avenue that I thought, okay, I can exploit some of that and still make the film I want to make.
Yeah, I'll throw in a question here as we're sort of in between talking about Killer's Kiss and The Killing. I think it's a good moment to ask this question and maybe to answer it myself or attempt to. Where is Kubrick at this point? And at what point in his career does he become, in quotes, Stanley Kubrick? Is he fully formed? I don't think he is at the point of Fear and Desire, but is he fully formed already by the time he's making Killer's Kiss? Or is he still a work in progress? Is he still in development? Because we've talked about scenes in this movie that have then carried over to the later years of his career. Where do you think he thought he was at this point? Was there a game plan, or did that come later?
Yes, that's hard to answer. I still think this is Kubrick in progress.
I think he thinks that.
Right.
Yeah. Do these two films stand alone then? They're the two noir that he did, and he never returned to that.
No, I think that's a clear thing that he feels like I think he's trying to make films that will get him to the point where he can make the films he wants to make.
And then it all kicks off properly with Passive Glory.
Yeah. I think once he's done that, he never comes back to the crime genre, with the exception of Clockwork Orange, I guess.
Well,
even then, that's not really...
His path is being directed at that point, isn't he? Through Kirk Douglas, largely. And obviously he was so instrumental in getting him in on Spartacus, which wasn't Kubrick's film to begin with. No,
and he never returns to anything after that. Each of his films are different from one another. This is the only brace that you can sort of talk about in tandem, really, isn't it? And so is this a different filmmaker to Stanley Kubrick, the man that we know and some of us revere?
Well, the American film industry was going through a state of flux at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The old certainties are no longer there. The stranglehold that the studios had over film making, film distribution, the careers of actors and so on had gone. It's extraordinary now to think that in the 30s, for instance, they owned everything. They owned the cinemas. They owned not just the studios, but where the films were shown. And films were sent out as packages. So you'd have your Wizard of Oz, but you'd have some crummy little film that you had to buy as part of the package. All that had gone. And also, the studios were not having the power that they used to have. It's becoming the era of the stars. And as they're becoming more important and getting more power, they are making the films that they want to make. Kirk Douglas is a case in point. Burt Lancaster had a production company. Even, I believe, Cary Grant had a production company. So they are the focal point of films now, the stars.
The business is changing and power is shifting.
Yeah, and you can see that reflected in Kubrick's films as well.
And also, is that you got the birth of the auteur theory coming through as well here in the 50s and then definitely in the 60s, where the importance of those directors becomes... I mean, you always had your big-name directors, but now everyone was an auteur. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Everyone
yeah.
had any sort of running theme through any of their work. They were an auteur.
Yeah, and suddenly, you know, directors and influential producers are sort of calling the shots a little more, and the studio aren't necessarily telling them what to do and which day to be on set and which film they're making. You know, they decide suddenly. Another thing, while we're sort of in between films, another question that I want to put, and I'll sort of ask this about Killer's Kiss, and then we can maybe ask it about The Killing later on. We know what Lolita is, we know what Spartacus is, we know what The Shining is in terms of what those films are about. What does the title Killer's Kiss mean?
Yes, I was wondering about that.
Is it a boxer's punch? Who's the killer?
I think you can
What's the
read,
kiss?
you can see more than one meaning in it,
Yeah,
can't
there
you?
are.
I mean, it seems to be a contradiction, doesn't it? You don't expect the killer to kiss. You know, one is a sign of aggression, the other one is a sign of tenderness. So you have a kind of conflict there. I mean, I'm not sure it was intended. It probably wasn't.
I think the only literal meaning I can see in the film is the attack on the girl by the guy in her apartment that's witnessed in the sort of rear window style. So the kiss isn't a sort of requited and desired one, is it? You know, but then that guy isn't a killer. He does, you know, he may pay other people to kill, but he doesn't actually commit a killing himself. So you know that leaves the question open. What is meant by the title Killer's Kiss? And as you say, I think there are several potential sort of meanings.
The cynic in me says when Kubrick, because Kubrick wrote this one as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
The cynic in me says that I need a snappy title.
Is it just a great pulp title?
And a Killer's Kiss is a great pulp title.
Well, it is.
And then he wrote the script, and it was like, I don't matter. You know, the title's fine. It'll sell. There's multiple reasons why it can work. Then they moved on.
Well, you've got the alliteration there, which, you know, it just sounds good, doesn't it? And you've got the letter K again for Kubrick in The Killing.
Yeah. I'm going to be daring here and lead on to the discussion of The Killing by asking the same question about that film's title. What is the killing in The Killing? Because again,
I think it's often used in crime, isn't it? When a big job has been
pulling
successfully
off the heist.
completed, you've made a killing.
Yeah. And that's certainly the case here.
And it works better than Killer's Kiss because it's shorter, direct, punchy.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the name of the book. The book that it's based on was called Clean Break by Lionel White. So
well, you can understand why I wouldn't call it a film.
Clean Break. It's not.
Now, is it a decision of Stanley Kubrick or is it a decision of Jim Thompson, who claims to have he's credited, I think, with writing dialogue?
The dialogue, yes.
But he claimed to the end of his life that he'd written the whole thing. So
what, the screenplay?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think Stanley Kubrick gets a credit for the screenplay.
Yes, he does,
But the dialogue is treated separately.
Yeah. But Jim Thompson claimed to have had much more of a say in this. But
I guess when you look at it, it's like, well, if it's based on a book by a very respected crime writer, Lionel White, very big name in pulp crime fiction of that period,
right?
And Kubrick's design the way it looks. Is dialogue not enough of a credit for him? What else did you bring to the situation?
Well, the dialogue is so distinctive in The Killing. You'd be proud of it.
Yeah,
I'd be proud if I wrote that.
Everyone's got an ego, you know. You can never get enough credit, do you? No. So We've got the robbery. They could be said, we're making a killing. We've got the shooting of a horse as the central murder in the film, which is very, very unusual.
You don't get horse assassination in many movies.
No, you don't.
No. We've got a mass shootout at one point. We've got Elisha Cook and Mary Windsor's relationship that's dying a death. You know, ultimately the scheme fails. That's a failure. So again, there's multiple myriad interpretations to this title, and I think that's great in both films. And it's not something Kubrick necessarily continued. As I say, A Clockwork Orange may be one that's up for debate, but then again, that's not Kubrick's title, and I think it's made pretty clear what A Clockwork Orange is. But, you know, a lot of people don't quite understand it and do debate that. But again, it's Anthony Burgess's title anyway. I think here we've got titles that are the most debatable and interesting and rich in Kubrick's filmography. Fear and Desire, which came before, it again is fairly sort of basic. I think that sort of describes what it is.
You've got triggers. You've got words as triggers there, haven't you? Fear, desire.
But
it doesn't tell you anything about the film.
Here you've got very conventional, as Adam says, very, very punchy noir titles, great Pulp Fiction titles, but I think they're so rich and detailed as well.
No, maybe titles just weren't his thing. And this because he was driven by other concerns to create these ones. Because when as he went along, he was like Lolita, Clockwork Orange, other titles, named Barry Lyndon.
They were given to him.
They were given to him. So
and The Shine, all through really.
Exactly. So
Eyes Wide Shut maybe is a standout. But even it's a contradiction.
Yeah, it's not particularly clever.
No, it's not.
Title, really,
it's too self-conscious.
Yeah. Whereas like these, he's being forced into I'm making a crime film. It's got to be a punchy crime style title that's going to get bums on seats. Sort of thing.
So is it almost accidental that they then have this range of meanings then?
I don't think Stanley Kubrick wants you spending too much time thinking about the title.
Certainly not at that
rather than at the expense of the movie. I think that's ultimately what it is.
We'll shut up about that. I want to move on to the opening titles of The Killing, which again, we said about the gladiatorial sort of aspects of the mannequin fight scene at the end of Killer's Kiss. Here we've got blaring fanfare music over the credits, and we've got shots of parading horses with sort of plumes and ornate reins and things on. That's a shot from Spartacus, 4 years early. You know, it's revealed that we're watching a racetrack. You know, we're watching the horses pulling the gate at the start of the next race, race 7, all importantly. There's a sense of ceremony and pageantry there right from the off, and it's over the opening titles.
But we don't know what kind of film we're going to get there.
Not at all.
At the beginning of Killer's Kiss, it's established right away. Yeah. We know where the world we're in.
So this is Kubrick making progress.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, and maybe relaxing a bit more. But certainly expanding his vision.
Yeah. I'd also argue, to sort of jump ahead and jump around this film a little, there's the great distraction fight scene in the racetrack bar later on, where they've hired this hulking wrestler to come in, and his shirt gets ripped off in the middle of the fight, and the punters in the bar all sort of clear the place and all stand around the edges, creating this sort of arena type space, and then 6 coppers rush in, and the wrestler's got them hanging off his body and hanging off his arms. And again, it's like a scene from Spartacus. It almost preempts what Kubrick was going to go on to.
So you could imagine Kirk Douglas watching that, thinking, "I must remember this fella.
Who's this guy? Yeah. He'd be perfect."
The structure of the film's quite interesting and influential and clever in the way that he replays the same scenes from different points of view as it goes along. I mean, Tarantino alone, you know what I mean? It's like,
well, Tarantino, we've mentioned Reservoir Dogs already in connection with the setup, the Robert Wise film, and I think that was an influence on both Tarantino and on Kubrick's Killer's Kiss. But Tarantino has said that The Killing was perhaps the main influence on his debut movie, and I think it shows.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really clever heist movie.
It is. The elaborate plot as well. It's very intriguing.
Again,
the diversions in order to distract from the crime that is really happening.
In 84 minutes or something. Again, we're not talking an epic here. We're talking about something that Kubrick made films twice that length or more later in his career. These two are both really, really punchy. You can watch them both back to back in an afternoon.
So Kubrick makes this film in 1956, a year after arguably one of the greatest heist movies of all time, Rafifi, is released. Had Kubrick seen it? Was he influenced by this, or was he just like working in isolation?
You can only speculate.
Because they've both got very smart takes on the crime.
That long, wordless scene where they're doing the actual robbery. Yeah,
I think Kubrick has probably seen the Asphalt Jungle. He's probably seen the Big Combo. He's probably he's seen every noir that's out
Odds
there,
Against
Adam.
Tomorrow.
He's seen Rififi for sure. Whether that's more of an influence on this than any other thing that he's seen, I'm not sure. As we said earlier on, he cast The Killing simply based on actors that I like in film noir that I like, so I don't know that there's any one particular film that stands out.
In some ways, I wasn't really thinking about whether it was a direct influence or whether it was more of an impetus to be smarter, to be cleverer in the way that they construct their heist movie. Because he could have just whacked out another. Not like to diminish Killer's Chris, but he could have whacked out another crime film like that, film, and directed the hell out of it, and it looked fantastic. And okay, well done, we'll move you up. Next time. But there seems to be a real desire to do something different with it, to do something interesting, to do something.
It's tempting with Killer's Kiss to feel that here were two people that he knew. And he managed to make a film of them. But obviously, with The Killing, you have at least two established stars there. All right, maybe not that they wouldn't carry a film in their own right, but they're recognisable faces and they're good supporting actors.
And as I say, Kubrick had cast from his love of film noir, and so most of the cast are people that would be recognisable to the audience going to see the film. I mentioned earlier that later reviews of Killer's Kiss have often said, "Oh, Kubrick's a little bit arty here, a bit indulgent. He's sort of a bit over ambitious at times, you know." Nobody says that about The Killing, I don't think. No. And yet he's still employing a lot of those techniques. He's trying to sort of stand out from the pack. And clearly, from the critic's point of view, he does it more successfully here because nobody notices. He gets away with it more, or he does it better here. Killer's Kiss is a great little film, but this is the next step. This is... This is but 2 or 3 steps up.
I think a lot of that's to do with the narrative and to do with the construction of the plot, because it's like that's as clever as Kubrick's filming of it.
Yes.
Whereas Killer's Kiss, the script is not as clever as the way Stanley Kubrick films it. So it's more noticeable.
I think Killer's Kiss does sort of dance around in time and space a little bit, and with non-linear narrative. We mentioned the ballerina sequence, for instance. So we're getting a story told about a past event, and then we're seeing another past event that's from a different time, but the story's being told in the time of the movie. That's being told to us right now, you know. So he's already sort of got this idea of messing around with the narrative and the structure a little bit, but he goes full on Rashomon here, you know. It's which I'm sure again is a film that he'd seen and loved, you know. And he doesn't do it for the whole film, but he does it in little segments, little important segments. And I suppose like Tarantino did in Jackie Brown, I suppose is the best comparison. He does it in important scenes. He'll show you the same scene from a different angle or a different point of view, a different time or a different perspective. And it works brilliantly. You as the audience always know where you are and what you're looking at. You never get confused. You always know exactly what the situation is, what we're seeing, where all the characters are, where people are. I think that's a good point. It's brilliantly.
I mean, I think with Killer's Kiss, you could argue that you have at least three different settings which don't necessarily gel together immediately. You're starting off in a small apartment, then you're in the dance hall, and then you're in the boxing ring, for instance. With the Killing, it's all centred around that racetrack. But even the individual apartments, Elisha Cook and his wife, for instance, you still recognise this as part of that culture, that world, and most of it obviously is shot around the racetrack with different parts, but they belong together. You get a real confidence really about using the spaces that the film is being shot in.
I think this film is about Elisha Cook and Mary Windsor.
Yes, They are the most
Really
intriguing characters.
Absolutely pivotal to this film.
And they're pivotal to the plot as well.
They are. And if I was to interpret the title, I would say it's about the death of their relationship. Her out of control ambition and avarice and greed and lust for money. She's got a really, really poisonous nature as well, I think. And it's that scuppers the whole plan.
Yeah.
She's not at the racetrack or involved in the robbery, but she scuppers the entire thing.
Yes.
From her apartment.
Yeah.
It's all about her.
Yeah, that's right.
The second most poisonous femme fatale in cinema
possibly.
history, behind Anne Savage in Detour.
Yeah, very, very likely. Yeah, there are a few contenders.
Yeah.
But there's even a scene where they're sitting down together at the kitchen table. And Mary Windsor's about a foot taller than Elisha Cook Jr., even when they're sitting down, you know. Yeah. So physically there's that sort of imbalance there, and that symbolism about the relationship. We know who wears the trousers.
Elisha Cook's so great in this film.
He's brilliant.
He's great in our films, but he has that look on his face where everything's a surprise.
Oh, he's haunted by everything.
Oh my God, I can't believe that just happened.
His eyes do that.
Yeah.
Kubrick knew that from seeing him in other films. That's why he's been cast.
I'm sure he
Kubrick
enjoyed being in
wanted
that film.
Yeah. But there is that physical contrast. And there's also, Kubrick, not only did he cast these people because he liked them in previous noir, but he knew that his audience would have seen those same films. And they bring baggage from those movies to their roles in this, I think. And those two characters more than anybody else.
Yeah, and Sterling Hayden, but he's a very interesting person anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like a character from a Joseph Conrad novel. He had this real cynicism about being a Hollywood actor, and he gave it up. I mean, with the Blu-ray and so on, there's one extra, which is him being interviewed on a boat in Paris in the Seine, and being interviewed for French TV, and his stories are. He has absolute contempt for Hollywood. He stayed there as long as he could, then he got out.
Yeah.
He'd given him the means in order to live his own life. And he was a bit of a nomad, really. Rootless.
Yeah, didn't he? They made a documentary about his life, didn't they? The Pharaoh of Chaos.
Right, yeah.
Which was played at one festival years ago, and it's basically him on screen.
Well, he acted his whole life. He was acting himself the whole life. You can see that in these features, for instance.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I mean, it was interesting that having given up Hollywood, he was tempted back by Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah. And didn't he come back and do Robert Altman as well? Wasn't he? He was in the Long Goodbye.
Yes.
Oh right.
We've talked about the sort of noir heroes that Kubrick sort of wanted to use in this movie and cast cast them because they were noir stars. But he discovered a few new people as well. Joe Turkel's in this very briefly. He plays the other gangster who comes into the apartment with the lover of Mary Windsor for the big shootout scene. And Joe Turkel is one of only 2 actors who appeared in 3 Stanley Kubrick films.
Oh, right.
Kubrick famously never worked with anyone more than once, apart from a tiny handful of actors. Joe Turkel did 3 films with him, including playing the bartender in The Shining in his most important role. He was in this, Paths of Glory, and The Shining. But Tim Carey is in this and Paths of Glory too. And then Tim Carey went on to become this outrageous sort of beatnik underground movie character in the early 60s who's got a big cult following, but he was a bit of a Kubrick discovery. I think he makes a real impression here playing he plays the assassin who's hired to kill the horse. Is it called Red Lightning or something? And it's a perfect part for him.
Oh, he's great.
If you're going to cast a guy who shoots a horse, who better? He's like a proto beatnik. This is 1956, and he's in there with all the finger clicking and calling everyone pops and saying everything's crazy.
I mean, he's not in it for long, but
no, he's not.
But you remember him.
Yeah, you do. He gets one brilliant scene that's actually really controversial. Perhaps not the thing that we like to focus on in doing these podcasts, but he uses a very strong racial epithet. He's setting up to shoot the horse at the racetrack. The race has started, the horses are coming round the bend. He's talked his way into the car park so he can set up his rifle and get a clear shot. And the car park attendant, he's tried to stop him getting in the car park initially, but they've struck up a bit of a friendship and he's slipped him $20 and so on. And the attendants then become pretty friendly with him and keeps turning up and irritating him as he's trying to sort of set up for the shooting.
Well, he poses as being disabled, doesn't he?
Yes,
The car, which is why he
Yeah.
needs to get in.
Yes.
So, he's
And so they sort of connect that way because he's got the war wound, hasn't he? And the attendant keeps going back to the open-top car that he's in and chatting to him. And all he's trying to do is set up his rifle and his sights and everything. And the car park attendant comes back just at the point where the horses are coming round the final bend and right into his view. And he's got to get rid of this guy. So out comes the unspoken word.
I think it's an interesting one, particularly in this day and age, in the 21st century, use of those kind of words, and whether we've gotten to the stage now where no matter who the character is, you can't use those words,
and what the
even
situation
if
is,
even if those characters are horrible racist people. I think it's fairly clear that the guy's going to shoot a horse. He's a despicable character.
Yeah. I don't think he's a racist either. I think he only says the word because he is desperate to get rid of the guy, and it's the best way he can think of to offend him.
I think that's the intention,
and I think that comes across.
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's brilliant drama for me.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
In an almost indefensible way, especially since the guy has been so friendly, and you do sense that in another world, Tim Carey may well reciprocate that friendship and they'd have gone for a beer after the race or something. But in these particular circumstances where he's been hired for this job, he's been hired to commit this ruthless assassination of this horse, and there's this guy getting in the way.
Yeah.
He does what he's got to do.
I agree. However, it is a problem created by itself.
Yes.
They cast a black actor in the role of the attendant.
Yeah.
And then worked away at getting rid of that character by this. Whereas nowadays, I don't think you would have a scene like that in the sense of that you could be argued that you've created the moment so you can solve it by having the racist term.
Yeah. Well, let's say that the attendant was a white character. You know, how would that scene have played out?
Well, yeah.
What would Tim Carey's character have said to get rid of him?
Well, he wouldn't. He'd have shot him and then shot the horse and then drove off.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying is that would be a different kind of.
And it
scene.
would be more conventional. I
More
think,
conventional,
not as
but the
effective.
argument would be that you've created that scene and created the problem to include the racist term, rather than create a different type of scene. Because ultimately, it's not essential to the plot of the killing overall that character is black and then that other character has to use the racial slur. So I think that's why you wouldn't have it in a modern film. I think if you had a modern film had racial slurs in it, the film's going to be about that. You know, it's going to be about racial tensions. It's going to be about racism. It's going to be about something like that to include those terms.
But it is in this film, and it's always going to be in this film, and it's clearly there for plot reasons, and brilliantly so. I think it's a great bit of drama, acceptable or not.
I think it's acceptable looking back. In the sense that I don't think it would happen now.
No, and it wouldn't be acceptable.
And it wouldn't be acceptable now. But looking back on it, it's like, well, it's used for a purpose in the drama.
I mean, I think it's interesting that we're raising this as a question, because if we look at the history of Hollywood and its use of black actors, it's shocking. You know, we recognise it now. You wonder why it wasn't recognised then. They're buffoons. They're slow-witted. They're lazy. You know, they have characteristics immediately. So it's a shorthand. You immediately know what that character's going to be like just because they're black.
And he isn't that character.
No, he's not exactly.
This guy's a war hero. He's personable. He's chatty. He's friendly. As I say, in other circumstances, Tim Carey may well have even struck up a friendship with him, and they'd have been best mates, you know. So yeah, he's portrayed in a very, very positive light, and
yes, he's a sympathetic character, even though he's incidental.
I think so. What about the mechanics of the heist? We've talked about the way it was portrayed, and Kubrick's use of time and space and flashback and so on, and point of view.
Yeah, and parallel pieces of action.
The whole mechanics of the way in which the operations performed, I think it's expertly edited.
It is.
Brilliantly.
It's orchestration, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you've got a number of narrative strands going along there simultaneously.
Yeah.
And
again, the audience always knows exactly where we are and who's doing what.
Yes, so we're not asking questions.
No. Carey's been introduced as you know, he and the big wrestling guy are not members of the gang.
No.
In fact, there's some talk about there's a sort of Reservoir Dogs type meeting of the gang, isn't there? And they talk about, you know, who are the guys you're bringing in from outside, you know, and there's a bit of suspicion goes on there. Like, you know, we all need to know each other. And the boss says, well, no, we've got to. You can't know who these guys are. They're here to do a specific job. And then talk about, well, do they get a cut of the money? You know, and there's all this sort of underlying tension and suspicion. But they do come in, they both do a professional job. And again, the job they do, the fight in the bar and then the shooting of the horse, are shown to us as part of this whole operation. And it's all seamless and it all works brilliantly. Yeah. And we think, oh, this is almost the perfect crime, you know. And the only thing that stops it being the perfect crime, as I've said, is a lady in an apartment miles away who most of the gang don't even know exists. I don't know how much to say about the ending of the film, because it's always difficult when we're doing podcasts.
I think you've got the question there. You need a climax. Even though to a large extent it's played itself out. You know, it's fallen apart. You have this one character left, and you need a visual punch, don't you, at the end? Yeah. And do you get it? I think you do.
I think so, yeah.
I think you do. However, the intricacies of the heist makes me feel like he wouldn't do the things that he did at the end of the movie, because he's a very clever man who puts together this heist, and then he gets basically caught out because he can't take on board baggage.
Yeah, it's mundane.
It is. It's just a boring.
Suddenly, though, he's got no control over that.
Yeah.
He's
but wouldn't he have figured that out before? That's the point I'm making. Surely that's not like a new regulation that you can't take suitcases on the flight with you. Yeah. That's got to be. That's literally, everyone knows that. You've got your limits on your hand baggage. When you go to Spain or whatever, and you see all those people who've crammed those hand luggage bags to the absolute limit because they don't want to pay the cargo fees.
I mean, it's almost comic, isn't it? You've got a criminal mastermind who can't deal with the mundanities of everyday life.
Exactly.
I mean, stuffing notes into a battered old suitcase is almost comic, isn't it?
For me, it took me out. I didn't believe the character would do that.
Yeah, I can see that because things have been so meticulous, and we've got a parallel there, because I think Kubrick has approached the movie in such a forensic and meticulous and careful way, in the same way that the characters approach the heist, and then it's almost like Kubrick and the character on screen sort of make the same mistake at the end.
I think basically Kubrick had the visual.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted.
And that's what he wanted. He was like, well, they'll forgive me that.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether we do.
No, maybe
so
not. I think it caps the cynicism of this movie, and it caps the fact that the whole plan, no matter how well orchestrated and planned it has been, it's doomed to fall apart, you know. And I think this visualization of the plan falling apart is absolutely necessary and works really, really well as a sort of visual symbol of that. And again, could be a depiction of the film's title.
It's comic to think that this came out more or less at the same time as The Lady Killers.
Yeah.
Which has a similar kind of setup.
Yeah.
but plays out in a completely different way. Obviously, it has different intentions.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to talk about the visual. We talk quite a lot about the construction of the plot on this one, but also the visuals there to Stanley Kubrick. And when people talk about the influences of Kubrick, the filmmakers they talk about are generally pulling from the visuals of Stanley Kubrick's career. It's like I'm massively influenced by Kubrick, the way he composes his shots, etc., etc. Whereas like one of the most recent directors is like Christopher Nolan, and looking at the plot of this, you can see how Nolan is massively influenced by the construction of the plot, particularly the time. Playing around with time. He's done that multiple times in his movies, most recently Tenet, but also with things like Dunkirk, where you had the 3 timelines running at different times, and then you have obviously Memento being told backwards. So he's obviously taken that style from The Killing and that influence there, which is, you don't see many other filmmakers so influenced by one aspect of a director's career.
And as we've said, Tarantino the same as well. You can see that in Reservoir Dogs, more so in Jackie Brown, I would say. And I mean, Tarantino, I think, took so much from The Killing. The relationship of the gang, and the fact that they're all sort of arguing with each other over who gets the biggest cut and what have you, and the whole sort of starkness of it as well. I think the atmosphere of The Killing sort of pervades into Tarantino's early films. I just think the Killing is great, and it works as a pair with Killer's Kiss, but taken on its own, it's the first Stanley Kubrick movie. It's the first film by the Kubrick that we came to know and respect. And I think in that sense you can maybe pair Killer's Kiss with Fear and Desire rather than pairing it with The Killing, But I think to discuss these two films together is enlightening and important, because I think they fit together as a great double bill.
I think Killer's Kiss works perfectly as a supporting feature.
As a sort of aperitif to
and in that way I think pairing it with The Killing is perfectly apt, because it feels like the supporting feature for The Killing. It warms you up. It's the warm-up act, and then suddenly. I think I'd go and see that double bill now in the cinema. I'd love to see it in the cinema.
And as I say, you could watch it all in 2 hours 20 minutes as well. So less than the length of The Shining, or Full Metal Jacket. So we forgot to mention when we were talking about Killer's Kiss that listeners to the podcast might be interested in a film from the early 90s, Stranger's Kiss, directed by Matthew Chapman. It's a fictional drama, but it's set around the shooting of Stanley Kubrick's film Killer's Kiss, and it sort of riffs on that and all the characters and what was going on behind the scenes and so on, and creates a drama of its own, sort of based on...
I think you're showing your age there, Darryl. It's also early 80s rather than early 90s.
Really?
So it's 83, so it's way before the whole Tarantino boom of the 90s and things like that. But way ahead of its time in that respect, in the sort of meta-referencing and things like that.
So Stranger's Kiss, if you want to see a third film after seeing these two, Stranger's Kiss would make another film that would be an ideal double bill with Killer's Kiss. So... There's the legacy of Killer's Kiss. It's the film that would make a great double bill with about 15 other movies.
Cool, very good. That's nailed 2 of Kubrick's things. I mean, we don't have to go back to Kubrick again for a while now, I think, but I'm sure we will.
Is it Michael Bay next?
Michael Bay next, yes. The use of the never-ending camera movement. Just stop, for goodness sake.
Again, you could fit these 2 Kubrick films into about half of a Michael Bay one, couldn't you?
Absolutely, And I know which I prefer to watch. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Darryl. We will be back again in another couple of weeks' time, so we will see you then. I want to thank Quad and the BFI for supporting these podcasts. Take care, everyone.